So we are towards the end of chapter 10, talking about the super tzaddik, the tzaddik gomer, and we've discussed the fact that the perfect tzaddik, the super tzaddik, the incredible tzaddik, is somebody who does things in a completely different way to how we do things. And so we spoke initially about sumeira, what it is that keeps the perfect tzaddik away from inappropriate things, and it's totally different to us. What keeps us away from doing things that are inappropriate is hard work. That's how we stay out of trouble. It takes a lot of hard work. We have to remember that these are things that we're not supposed to do. We have to remember that we have to have self-control, etc. And then we're going to be able to actually steer clear of the things that are not appropriate in our lives. The perfect tzaddik doesn't have that problem because the perfect tzaddik is in a completely different headspace. In the perfect tzaddik's world, if there's something which is against what Hashem wants, that is despicable. And if it's despicable, there are two choices. Either you destroy it, which is what the imperfect tzaddik wants to achieve, or you say, we've got to turn this around. We've got to transform this very negative energy to become something positive. So the perfect tzaddik is so engaged with the transformation of negative into positive that obviously it's not going to do anything wrong. And we spent a lot of time and energy talking about that and understanding this principle. Then last week we started to say, well, what about the other side? Asay tov. What about the things that the tzaddik does proactively? Because we're all expected, of course, to do certain things for our Judaism. So there too we said the tzaddik behaves in a way that is completely different to how we behave. And that's part of the reason why the tzaddik fits into this category that is called Bnei Aliyah, individuals who are very elevated, they're at a completely different stage, at a completely different spiritual altitude to the rest of us. And that's what makes the tzaddik so amazing. So we started to talk about this last week, but we haven't really got into the thick of it, which is, please God, what we're going to do this week. The real differentiator. What makes the tzaddik gomer, the perfect tzaddik, so absolutely unique? Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at this evening, please God. And we're going to discover something that the tzaddik does, the perfect tzaddik does, so to speak, for Hashem. You know, because one of the things that we often have to think about is we don't add any value to Hashem. Hashem is perfect. Hashem is infinite. We don't really have the capacity, or not just us. I mean, nobody has the capacity or the ability to add any value to Hashem. You can't add to something which is already infinite. But yet, we're going to learn over here that the tzaddik does in some way contribute to Hashem. It's a very, very interesting proposal that we're going to be learning about over here today. So, last week we said that what drives a tzaddik is not what drives us. In other words, what motivates the tzaddik, the perfect tzaddik, to do what is right is different to us. We are possibly motivated by to do what Hashem wants because we want to get something out of it, because it will improve our lives, it will position us well for the world to come, it will give Hashem a lot of nachas. Or one of the things that we identified as one of the most advanced levels that a person could be at is why do I do what Hashem wants? Because I have this incredible thirst to be able to connect to Hashem, and there is no way to satisfy that thirst except to do what Hashem wants. And that's why I'm doing what Hashem wants, because I need to deal with the thirst that I have. Okay? And we're going to see, as we started to see last week, that the tzaddik gomer does not come from that perspective. The perfect tzaddik is not trying to satisfy personal thirst. And that's what we've got to unpack. So on page 44, if you have the book, and otherwise it's on the screen. So I should make a public service announcement that this is the correct way to arrive at a shiur, with snacks and with l'chaim. It's the correct way to arrive at a shiur. Unfortunately, for the people who are on Zoom, they don't get to benefit from all of that input. Okay, so on page 44, about 5 lines from the top of the page. So we said that the nature of a person who's got a very high spiritual standing is that they'll want to connect to Hashem because they've got this intense thirst for that relationship, and the only way to satisfy that relationship, obviously, is to do what Hashem wants. So we say that the perfect tzaddik is not that way. So let's read it. I'm going back a drop, but let's just read it so that we remember what it is that we're talking about. So the other reason that Yikroim Bnei Aliyah, that these tzaddikim are called Bnei Aliyah, these elevated personalities, is because even the things that they are doing proactively to do what is right, to do what Hashem wants of them, became a Torah u'mitzvah, which is what a person fulfills through what the Torah's expectations or the mitzvahs that we're supposed to do. Hu letzorech gavoya, is for a higher purpose. And it's this higher purpose that is a little mysterious to us, that we have to try and understand and we have to try and unpack. And so that's what we're going to be doing a little bit of this evening. So, tzorech gavoya, for a higher purpose. Which means, that they want to elevate higher and higher to the very, very highest levels a person could possibly attain. And their motivation is not simply to be able to have a relationship with Hashem, which will then satisfy this incredible thirst that they have towards Hashem. As the pasuk, as the verse, the prophet tells us, Hoi kol tzamei lechu lamayim. Anybody who is thirsty should go to the water. As is explained elsewhere. Okay, so what have we positioned over here is that there's a very developed state of spirituality that a person could reach where they actually feel thirsty. And we all know from our own experience, tomorrow's going to be a fast day, so we'll definitely know what it is. We know what it's like to feel thirsty. It's a very compelling feeling. It's not something you could say, I'm going to procrastinate about it. I'm feeling very thirsty, but I'll deal with it on Wednesday. That's not how it works. When a person is in a state where they're very thirsty, it's urgent. So by describing kol tzameh, that there's a person who has this thirsting for Hashem, rather than just saying an aspiration or a yearning, thirst is very palpable, it's very immediate, it's very urgent. And so basically the person is effectively saying, I need this in my life right now. I need Hashem in my life right now. Sounds great. Sounds definitely beyond how most of us operate. And now we're discovering that that's nowhere near the reality of the Tzadik Gomer, the perfect Tzadik. So what is the perfect Tzadik after? What is the perfect Tzadik driven by? Ella. So the answer to that is Kidepirshu B'Tikunim, as is brought in the Kabbalistic sources, where it says, Ezehu Chosid. This is one of the big questions that is asked in various different classical sources. And it's possibly a question that is asked regularly in the Jewish community. Ezehu Chosid. Who is a Chosid? No? So who is a Chosid? How would you define a Chosid? So many people tell you, who's a Chosid? A person who's got twirling payas and wears a fur shtreimel on Shabbos, and they've got a long silk coat. That is a Chosid, according to maybe some people's interpretation, right? What is a Chosid? How do you define? What is a Chosid? Ezehu Chosid. Yeah? What is a Chosid? So,
Rabbi, he goes beyond what he's supposed to do.
Oh, there we go. That's right. Correct. So the Gemara tells us that Ezehu Chosid, what's the definition of a Chosid? A Chosid does what is called lifnim mishuras hadin, beyond the requirements of the law. That's the definition of a Chosid. Lifnim mishuras hadin. Somebody goes beyond the requirements of the law. And the Gemara actually gives an example for this. The Gemara says that if there is somebody who is going to cut their nails, okay, interesting example, because you don't necessarily always think about a chassid in the context of cutting your nails. So it says that when a person cuts their nails, a rasha, a person who's an inconsiderate human being, just drops their nails on the floor. A tzaddik, that's somebody who, in that context, is an individual who observes the law exactly the way that you're supposed to observe the law, buries their nails because they don't want anybody to step on the nails. Apparently that could cause some kind of negative energy for the person. A chassid is not satisfied to bury the nails. A chassid burns the nails. So it's lifnim mishuras hadin. They go beyond what is required, even to do something which might be somehow harmful to themselves in order to do what Hashem wants. But here, what we're about to discover is a different definition of a chassid. Okay? So what is a chassid? Ezel chassid, hamischased im koinoi. Now, the most direct way to translate this would be, chassid comes from the root chesed, which is kindness. So who is a chassid? Hamischased im koinoi is an individual who deals with his creator in a kind way. In fact, it's even more powerful than that. Mischased, for those people who are familiar with Hebrew grammar, mischased means to cause kindness to his creator. That is a disturbing suggestion. Well, I can do kindness for Hashem. Who do you do kindness for usually? For usually for somebody who needs it. In other words, if a person doesn't need something, you can't really show them kindness. So you drive the streets of Johannesburg, you have many, many opportunities to share kindness because you encounter many, many people who are lacking. Lahavdil, you walk in the streets of Jerusalem, you have many opportunities to share kindness because there are many people who need. But Hashem doesn't need anything. Hashem is absolute. Hashem is infinite. How could you be mischasedim koinoi? How could you possibly add value, add kindness to Hashem? And that's the Kabbalistic definition of a chassid. Somebody who adds or gives kindness to Hashem. What does that mean? So then they explain it. And the explanation itself doesn't make sense. It seems to make sense. Im koinoi they translate as im kain delay. A kain is a nest. So who is the chassid? The person who does kindness with his nest. What does that even mean? What nest are we talking about? 1 minute you're talking about doing kindness to the Creator. The next minute we talk about, what is this? So to understand this, we're going to read a few more words, and then we're going to have to unpack them all. Leyachdo kuchebrichu ushchinte. Where the goal and purpose of this chassid, which is the term we're now borrowing to refer to a perfect tzaddik, is to create the unity between kuchebrichu and the Shechina, betachtonim in the lowest realms, as is explained in another section of the Zohar. So now we have quite a lot of language that we have to decode. We have the word koinoi, the creator. We have the word kain, delay, the nest. We have the word kuchabrichu, or the phrase kuchabrichu, which we will typically translate as the Holy One, blessed be He, which incidentally sounds more Pesach than Purim. We start using those words. We have the Shechina, the divine presence. What is going on over here? And leyachdo, the bringing together of the Shechina and kuchabrichu. So what's happening over here? So when you think of a nest, what do you think of? What do you think the symbolism, if I'm going to use nest as a metaphor, what would you think that the symbolism or the metaphoric value of a nest would be? Well, the first thing, don't overthink it, the first things that come to mind when you think of a nest
Source.
is
The source.
the source. Why would you say the nest is the source?
Birds.
That's where.
Birds.
Yeah, the source.
The source of what? What's the source of what?
Probably the source of kindness. I don't know.
Okay, but that's very abstract. That's already quite poetic if we're going to say that as that
The home.
the home. Oh,
Something
there we go.
that
The
protects
home.
you.
The nest would represent a place that is secure, a place that is protective, a place that is nurturing, a place that is warm. So a home. A nest would represent a home. Okay? Now, Cain delay his nest. So it implies almost that we're talking about Hashem's home. Let's understand what that means. We generally and generically refer to Hashem. Generically, Hashem. Right? But sometimes we've got to unpack that a little bit better and try and determine what exactly are we talking about when we describe Hashem. So one of the key things that we have to identify is that usually, actually, when we're speaking about Hashem most of the time, without even thinking about it, without even realizing, most of the time we're talking about Hashem in context of us. So we're thinking of Hashem as the creator, we're thinking of Hashem as the sustainer of life, and we're thinking of Hashem as the father figure, Avinu Malkeinu, our Father in heaven. Like that's pretty much what we're thinking about when we say the term Hashem. We don't typically think of Hashem in the most abstract, absolute terms. We think about Hashem in relatable terms. When Hashem creates the world, or when Hashem sustains the life within the world, that's obviously very meaningful for us because Hashem is giving us what we need in our lives. Hashem is, kind of feeding us. So that gives us that sense of security, like the cane, like the nest. That gives us the sense that we have a home, we have a place where we belong, we have a place that is safe, we have a place where we'll receive the things that we need. The babies, the chicks that are in the nest, they know they're going to be getting food, they know that they're going to be protected, they know that they have the parent or whatever it is, So there's great advantage to being in the nest. Being in Hashem's created reality, in Hashem's world, is like being in the nest. So when we talk about the nest, we're effectively talking about the dimension of godliness that relates to creation. And it's important for us to remind ourselves that Hashem is not a creator. Hashem creates. Now let's understand the difference between saying Hashem is the creator or saying Hashem creates. Let's understand that difference. So, what would happen if you were on your way, let's just say there was a talk that you were going to listen to, and you're very excited to hear this particular speaker because they're speaking about a subject that you really care about, and you've heard that they do a brilliant presentation. So now you're driving to get to that particular talk where this particular person is going to present. Now, we don't often think about it, but let's think about it. When we sit in the traffic and there's cars all around us, we look at all those people in all of those cars and we reduce them all to one common denominator: drivers. They're all drivers. They're good drivers, they're bad drivers, they are slow drivers, they are fast drivers, they are safe drivers, they are reckless drivers. But we reduce all of those people to drivers. So, if it happens that the person's directly behind us might, for all we know, be a very qualified, very talented musician, to us, they're a driver. The person one lane over might, for all we know, be a surgeon who has just done some absolutely revolutionary surgery that's going to change the whole world. And to us, they're a driver. And the person in front of us is probably driving too slow, because that's the law of relativity when you drive. Whoever's in front of you is driving like an old grandmother, and whoever's behind you is driving like a Meshuggah. So the person in front who is driving so slowly, for all you know, is Taka, grandmother, who's a wonderful person who has grandchildren in the back seat and cares very much for those grandchildren, doesn't want to speed. What do we see? Driver. So what happens if you're sitting in the traffic and the person in front of you is driving too slowly because you're feeling under pressure, because you need to get to this talk that's so important that you want to get to, so you're like gripping your steering wheel, as one does, and you're edging and edging because you want to just get past the slow driver. And guess what? Dafka, by divine providence, the one person who's delaying you from getting to this talk is there in front of you the whole way to the hall. Every turn that you need to take, they take the same turn. And they're consistently in front of you, you can't get rid of them. Eventually, you're huffing and puffing and all frazzled about the fact that you're going to be late for this presentation. You arrive at the presentation, you pull into the parking, and the other car pulls into the parking right next to you. And who gets out? The person who's going to present the talk that evening. That's who you were stuck about. Up until this moment, you thought that they were the driver. That's all you saw. They're a driver. There are many drivers. They're good drivers, bad drivers. This is a driver. Now they step out of the car, you realize, number one, you're not late because you arrived at the same time as the presenter. And number two, they're a lot more than a driver. Suddenly your eyes open. You realize there's a lot more to the story. Now imagine if you were the MC of this event. So now you've got to introduce this person to speak. What do you think would happen if you got up in front of this audience, and here's this highly accomplished individual who's going to speak about this very important or mature topic, and you get up and you introduce them? Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure this evening to introduce you to Professor X, the driver, or even the slow driver, as the case may be. That would be a terrible insult. Now, is it factual? Is it factually accurate to say that this person is a driver? Yes, it is. But it's an insult if you reduce all of their achievements into saying you're a driver. Factual it might be. That's not what you are. It's what you did, or what you do for a certain period of the day, every single day. Is Hashem a creator? No. Hashem creates. He creates at every single nanosecond of every single day since the beginning of creation. That's what he does. But we shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that's what he is. That's Cain delay. That is the dimension of godliness that makes the nest. That is the dimension of godliness that allows us to exist, and therefore in our lives is incredibly relevant and important. But for Hashem is nothing. It's absolutely superficial. So we call that, in the language of Jewish mysticism, we call that the Shekhinah, the divine presence. Now, people always throw around this word Shekhinah, not necessarily understanding what it means. The word Shekhinah comes from the Hebrew root Shin Chof Nun, which means to dwell. Lishkon, like the word Mishkan, right? To dwell, which is related to the word Shachen, your neighbor. The Shekhinah describes the dimension of godliness that enters our reality, that is in our neighborhood, that allows our neighborhood. That's the difference between Hashem and a regular neighbor. A regular neighbor moves into my neighborhood. I'm already in the neighborhood, and then the neighbor joins me in the neighborhood. Whereas for Hashem, being the neighbor means Hashem makes the neighborhood exist. So for many people to want to have a connection to Hashem, and I'm not saying that that's the only possibility, because we did describe that somebody has this deep thirst that they want to connect to Hashem, but for many people, the yearning to connect to Hashem is to connect to the Shekhinah. I want to connect to the godliness that is relevant and detectable in my world, in my reality. That's what I want to connect to. So I know Hashem is the creator. I want to connect with the creator. Very, very few people actually have the knowledge and the awareness, let alone the motivation, to want to connect to Hashem beyond creator. The average person, why do I want to have a connection to Hashem? It's going to be good. It's going to be valuable. It's going to add to my life. So here what we're seeing is, not only is the Tzadik Gomer, the perfect Tzadik, beyond that, where he's not just motivated because I need an in with the Creator. Because the perfect Tzadik wants to connect to a level that is way beyond Creator, but mischased im koinoi. He wants to create chesed, he wants to show kindness to the lowly dimension of godliness that powers our world. Which sounds quite abstract. What does it really mean? So it means, as the Alter Rebbe told us, leyachdo kutchabrichu ushchinte, to create a harmonious union between kutchabrichu and the Shekhinah. So now let's understand what kutchabrichu is. Kutchabrichu comes from the word, it's Aramaic, so the Hebrew version would be Ha Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? The Holy One, blessed be He. The problem is that when we translate things into English, we don't really appreciate what they mean. So Kadosh we translate as holy, which is a useless translation, because quite honestly, what does holy mean? Kadosh really means completely detached, completely removed, completely beyond. That's what Kadosh means. So Kudsha Brichu is referring to the dimension of godliness that is totally detached from creation. It is too great for creation. It is beyond creation. Again, Kudsha Brichu, if we were to use the metaphor of the great speaker who's come to this event, the speaker is Kudsha Brichu. The speech is Shekhinah. And of course, the fact that they're a driver is even less than that. Because when a person is communicating, no matter how well they communicate, no matter how easily the audience can follow and understand what they're saying, the reality is that the nature of communication is to withhold more than what you share. That's the nature of communication. So if you listened to a lecture from somebody who was an incredible scholar, you'd walk out of there very impressed, but you'd also have to acknowledge that you haven't begun to hear what this person has to share. So the Shekhinah is the dimension of godliness where Hashem is, so to speak, speaking to our world, speaking to our universe, communicating energy that creates every single facet of existence. But Kudsha Brichu, the real truth of Hashem, is way beyond that, is way beyond comprehension, not just human comprehension, is way beyond comprehension. So by definition, the two realities of how Hashem operates can't surely operate simultaneously. Again, let's go back to the example of the great scholar or the great professor that's speaking to the crowd. You can't be the researcher at the same time that you are the presenter. Can't. They're two different realities. In order to be a presenter, you have to distill information. You have to present it in a way that's very clear. In order to be a researcher, you have to drill down into information. You can't afford to distill things. You have to get every single facet and perspective and angle and whatever of that information in order to understand it properly. You can't be a genius at the time that you're trying to speak to a child. I mean, you have to have genius to know how to speak to a child. But at the time that you're speaking to a child, and you're trying to explain something, we all have this all the time because we have to explain things to children, and we have to explain them in child language, not in our own language. So you can't be the profound adult at the same time that you're simplifying for a child. So you can't be kutchabrichu at the same time that you are shchinte. Okay, Hashem can, obviously, because Hashem can do anything. But the reality is the shchina energy and the kutchabrichu energy are very different, and they cannot coexist by nature. But what's the ultimate goal and purpose of creation? Why did Hashem make the world? Not to detach himself from it or us from him. Why did Hashem create the world? What was the ultimate purpose of creation? To create that impossible blend. So in other words, Hashem spoke the universe into existence. He specifically spoke because speaking is something which is relatively superficial. So he wanted the world to feel independent, to feel distant, to operate with its own choices, or at least the people in it, with their own choices and with their own capacity to fail and their own capacity to destroy, which obviously then allows the possibility to succeed and to fix and to uplift. But the goal was not to leave us dangling. The goal is to bring that heightened reality of Kutchabrichu into our limited reality of Shechina. You'll see in certain Sidurim, before the special mitzvahs that we do, only once a year, like the Lulav or whatever, the Sukkah, you'll see that they put in the line over there, L'shem, Yichud, Kutchabrichu, Ushchinte. The reason we're doing this mitzvah is to harmonize the two realities of how Hashem interacts with us. The one that's completely beyond and the one that's completely within, to bring them together. The Shem Yichud, to bring them together. That's the purpose. That's why we're doing a mitzvah. So who benefits? Here's the ultimate. Who benefits from that harmony? Of course, it's easy for us to say we do because we're citizens of Olam Hazeh, of the universe, and Hashem is now, so to speak, introducing this higher level, this higher energy. So obviously we're going to benefit. But the Tzadik Gomer, we've already established, is not interested in what he's going to get out of it. It's not a self-interest. It's not a quenching of my thirst. So what's driving the Tzadik Gomer to behave in a particular way is what? So who's going to benefit? The Shechina.
Hashem.
You can't say Hashem. Hashem is too generic. Who's going to benefit? The Shechina is going to benefit. Let's put it this way. Here's a great way to understand it. We know, of course, that at the beginning of creation, when Hashem introduced the first humans, so he introduced the first humans as Ha'adam, which is a prototype, or if you want to say, a paragon of the human being. And when the Torah presents the first human being, even though the word is Adam, which sounds like a masculine word, the Torah tells us it's Zachar Unekev, it's male and female. And then Hashem separates the female from the male. And then for the rest of history, men and women are trying to get back together again. Right? That's basically... So why did Hashem design it that way? Because the human being is Adam el-Elyon. We're supposed to be designed, B'Tselem Elokim, in the divine image, which means whatever's going in our lives is metaphoric of what's going on between Hashem and his world. So who stands to benefit at the end of the day from this harmony? The one who was detached. The person who was detached. And that's why the way Hashem designed the world is that women, by nature, are much more enthusiastic about getting married than men, because they feel how much completion and wholeness they're going to be able to have. Whereas men, very often they're looking for some quiet, for some solitude. So who's the one who stands to benefit the most? The one who was detached. In order for Hashem to create our world, the metaphor of this separating of the male and female, in order for Hashem to create our world, he detached the Shechina to become, so to speak, like an independent divine entity, so that it could have all of the limitations required to create a world and to allow the independence within the world and all the things that we've described. So who stands to benefit from being reconnected, from having the divine energy reintroduced? Who stands to benefit? The Cain, the nest. So the Tzaddik's motivation to do a mitzvah is not because I'm going to get a reward, not because my life is going to be better, not because I'll secure a place in the world to come, not even to quench my spiritual thirst. Why am I doing a mitzvah? Because it benefits Hashem's Shekhinah. It benefits, in the language of Chassidus, what we call Malchus of Atzilus, if you want the technical terminology. The part of the divine organism that was made independent, that was kind of detached, that was kind of separated. So what drives the Tzadik Gomer to do what is appropriate? Because it will benefit Hashem's plan. Because it will benefit Hashem's Shekhinah. That's what I care about. And he's going to give a very powerful metaphor to illustrate this. So what does it say in the Zohar? It says, Kivra, like a child, like a son, Deshtadel basar avoi ve'imei, who puts in this tremendous effort to kind of chase after or connect with his own parents. Where a child loves a parent even more than they love themselves. And he goes on to explain that this is like the child is willing to actually risk their own lives to save their parents. What's he describing over here? That when a person has that level of connection, when a person has that level of awareness, needless to say, when a person has that level of love, because remember, we've spoken extensively in this chapter about the fact that the Tzadik Gomer has this intense, unwavering love for Hashem. When somebody has that level of love, they will risk themselves for the benefit of the one they love. That's the metaphor that he's using of this child who will endanger himself in order to protect his parents. And you can visualize it. You could see, the child is so incredibly defensive or so incredibly concerned about the parent that they'll take all kinds of things on in order that the parent should be safe, in order that the parent should be okay, in order that the parent should have what they need. In fact, I'm just looking around the room and I could definitely see examples of exactly that. So the tzaddik is positioned in that way with regards to Hashem. It's not about me. It's not about what I'm going to get. It's not about what I'll achieve. It's not about how high my neshama is going to be. It is so that the parent, Cain, the nest represents a parent, right? Because who creates the nest and who sustains the chick in the nest is the parent. So the Cain, the nest is going to benefit. That's what I care about. Interesting question somebody asked over here. Would this not benefit HaKadosh Baruch Hu even more than it benefits the Shekhinah? So here's the thing. It's a very, very interesting question, because if you got to be really careful when we talk about benefiting Hashem, because that's an incredibly bold thing for us to suggest, that we're going to add benefit to Hashem, we're going to show kindness to Hashem. These are very fine-tuned principles, and we've got to be careful how we use them. The Shekhinah is the dimension of godliness that Hashem designed to be limited, to be, so to speak, detached from the original organism of godliness. That's how Hashem designed it, that the Shekhinah should have this kind of separation. And the purpose, therefore, is that we, as people who are doing what Hashem wants, should be able to feed into the Shekhinah energy from the higher dimensions of godliness that it currently does not have in and of itself, on the one hand. But I'll tell you why it's a little bit tricky over here, is because we're told that Shekhinah, otherwise known as Malchus Ta'atzilus, has the capacity to add value to the things that are greater than it as well. But that's not us necessarily doing that. So when you ask the question, would it benefit HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Possibly, but we can't say that we're adding value to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We can say that we're adding value to the Shekhinah. That we could say. And the main way in which we're adding value is by the Yachta, to bring together the Kucha Bricha and Shekhinah. Anyhow, the part that's relevant for us is that's what motivates the Tzadik Gomer. That the Tzadik Gomer is somebody, the perfect Tzadik is somebody who wants to ensure that they are making that difference, that they're having that impact on Hashem's plan. That's what they care about. That's what they care about. And maybe another perspective on this, just so we know, is whenever we talk about the state of Golus, which is, people use I don't know, English doesn't have great words for it, so we use words like exile, which immediately sounds geographical. Because exile sounds like you're not in your home. And then the implication of that is that if you go back to your home, you're no longer in exile. Golus, we talk about Shchinta begolusa. That's how it's described. The Shechina, the divine presence, is limited by the state of Golus that we're in. Meaning to say the divine presence is not able to manifest in the world in the way that it should, and it has all these restraints and constraints against it. By us feeding Kutchabrichu into Shechinta, in other words, by us bringing about the awareness of Hashem through the mitzvahs that we do, we take the Shechina out of Golus. We release it into its full-fledged power. That's what the Tzadik cares about. So if you want to... Tzadik Gomer.
It's only Tzadik.
That's what it says. Tzadik Gomer. That is the definition of a Tzadik Gomer. A Tzadik Gomer, a perfect Tzadik, is somebody who is absolutely, that's what they care about, that's what they eat, sleep, and dream. That's what their whole life is motivated by. To get the Shechina out of Golus. You want to put it into simple language, to get the Shechina out of Golus. That is the definition of a Tzadik Gomer. Right? Well, it's just the definition, because we spoke about the other side of it as well. We spoke about what motivates the Tzadik Gomer's avoidance of things that are inappropriate. But the Tzadik Gomer's drive to do what is appropriate, that's what it is. To be able to add value to the cane, to the nest, to the divine presence, which is an incredibly elevated state to be in. That doesn't mean that the regular people can't be motivated because we want to bring Mashiach. Obviously we can. But the tzaddik is living, as he said in the metaphor, to the extent that he'll relinquish everything of his own interest in favor of the parental interest. In other words, he'll give up. Like, for example, we always hear these stories.
The tzaddik is 24/7, and by us is sometime.
It's not only quantity, it's quality.
Quality, yeah.
It's not only quantity,
Yeah.
it's quality.
Quality.
So, for example, we hear these stories occasionally, or you read these stories. So-and-so, this particular tzaddik was involved in a particular incident or a particular event, and then we get told, because the tzaddik did whatever he did in order to save the day, the tzaddik lost his portion in the world to come. I'm going to say often, but occasionally you hear these stories. The tzaddik did X and Y and was very dramatic, and as a result, the tzaddik lost his portion in the world to come. So very often when those stories are relayed, they are relayed at the end with the Disney happily ever after version, which is, and then after that, in heaven, they saw that the tzaddik was so committed, so they gave him an even bigger portion in the world to come. That's so that people don't have sleepless nights. It's not necessarily what actually happened in the story. What happens in the story is that tzaddik is willing to give up everything, to give up Gan Eden, to give up whatever it is. Why? Because the tzaddik is not motivated by what's in it for me. The tzaddik is motivated by what's in it for God. The Shechina, if you want to be precise. That's what drives and motivates the tzaddik. That's what gets the tzaddik to do the things that the Torah expects of us. So now that we have these two sides of it, the way the tzaddik is avoiding what is negative, not because he's working so hard on self-control, but rather because anything which is negative goes against what Hashem wants. So needless to say, I'm going to avoid it like the plague, and not only avoid it, I'm going to try and spin it around and turn it into something positive, because that will satisfy Hashem's motivation. And when it comes to doing proactive mitzvahs, why am I doing the mitzvah, the Tzadik Gomer? Because I want to add value, so to speak, to Hashem. So he kind of summarizes all at the end. It's a little bit, if you want to say a little bit technical. These two sides of the perfect tzaddik's way of serving Hashem are just that, two sides of a single coin. Ki. What happens when we engage this world? And we're talking over here about Noiga, which we learned about in the 6th chapter. Noiga is those parts of this world, actually the 7th chapter. That's where those parts of this world that are not naturally aligned with holiness, but have the potential to be aligned with holiness. So it really depends what we do with those things, whether or not they become holy or not. So let's say, for example, we do it right. So money is a great example of this. Money, people call this the great evil or whatever. That's not true. As far as Judaism is concerned, money is 100% neutral. And then what we do with the money will determine whether it becomes something which is really holy or whether it becomes something which is completely hedonistic. That's our choice. So when a person elevates money to become holy by giving tzedakah or spending it on a mitzvah or entertaining on Shabbos or whatever the things are that we do, so what happens is then, al yidei habirurim, by going through that refinement process, which means we take something of the physical world and we recalibrate it to have a meaningful, holy characteristic. Shemevarim inoiga, that means we take things of the world of neutrality and we elevate them to a state of holiness. What that does is mailim mayin nukvin. That elevates, in the language of pure Kabbalistic literature, that elevates what we call female waters. And that in turn causes, ve'nasim yichudim elyonim, that causes connections in the higher realms, lehoirid mayin dechurin, which in turn brings down male waters. Okay? What does that mean? Shehem, I'm going to finish to the end and then we'll unpack it. Shehem, what that means is, they are meimei hachasadim shebechol mitzvah or mitzvah miramach mitzvah saseh. That is the so-called waters of Hashem's kindness that flow through all of the 248 positive mitzvahs. Shekulon hein bechinas chasadim, all of which, every positive mitzvah is an expression of Hashem's kindness. Or mayin dechurin, and are all within the category of what we call masculine waters. Dahainu, which means amshochas kedusha selekusi isborch mamayla lemata, that we're drawing down Hashem's holiness from above to below, lehi slabish b'sachtonim k'moshel yisbor b'makim acher, in order to manifest in this world, which will be explained elsewhere. Okay, it's a lot of jargons. Let's try and understand it. You might remember that on the second day of creation, the Torah talks about the fact that Hashem divided between the higher and the lower waters, and that has various interpretations, whether it's talking about the heaven and the oceans. But one of the explanations of this high and low waters is that there are two types of energy flow that exist in this world. Maybe. So there are two kinds of energy that flow in this world. There's energy that flows upwards and there's energy that flows downwards. So energy that flows upwards is what we call feminine waters, and energy that flows downwards is what we call masculine waters. Meaning what? Meaning you have water that is associated with chesed, which is seen as a masculine attribute, and water that is associated with gevurah, which is seen as a feminine attribute. What's the difference between chesed and gevurah? There are many differences, but the one that's going to be relevant for our conversation is that masculine water is the flow from the have to the have-not. That's what masculine water is supposed to represent. Mayin dechurin, the flow from the have to the have-not. So, in the ultimate scheme of things, Hashem is the ultimate have, and all of us are have-nots. We're all lacking all kinds of things in our lives. We're lacking holiness, we're lacking wisdom, we're lacking energy, we're lacking brocha, etc. So anytime that Hashem gives us something in our lives, gives us a brocha, gives us life itself, gives us inspiration, that is masculine waters. Feminine water, gevurah, the nature of gevurah is not what you get, but what you generate of your own accord. That's why gevurah is strength, because you have to have the strength, you have to have the power to self-motivate, to self-propel. That's the movement upwards. So I am in a particular state. If it's in a mundane sense, the person is a have-not. They don't have money, they don't have friends, or whatever the case is. So they work on themselves in order to lift themselves out of the dirt and to be able to actually establish themselves, make a name, set up a business, or whatever the case is. In spiritual terms, Mayin Nukvin, the feminine waters, the Gevurah waters, is us reaching up from the mud of this world in order to have a connection and relationship with Hashem. So, when a tzaddik looks at the dirt in this world, and as we've already established in this chapter, he does not look at the dirt in this world and say, oh no, this is a terrible place to live. But rather the tzaddik says, there is dirt in this world, we need to elevate it, we need to transform it. That is my nukvin. That is this feminine flow upwards, where the tzaddik effectively reaches into the world, grabs hold of things that are disconnected from holiness, and lifts them up to have that relationship with holiness. When he does that, he creates a connection between something that was previously stuck in this world and the higher truth. He's made a connection. That thing is now no longer anchored in our world. It's actually plugged into a higher reality. And that generates a flow of Hashem's energy back into our world. That brings the Kutsha Brichu into the Shekhinah. And so that summarizes for us the dynamic of how the perfect tzaddik works. The perfect tzaddik wants only one outcome, and that is more godliness in the world, because that's what Hashem wants. To get there, the tzaddik does two things. He generates more godliness in the world by doing more mitzvahs, but he also lifts the world by transformation and elevation and refinement, because that he knows will also bring more godliness into the world. And so, in summary, the Tzadik Gomer's entire motivation is he loves Hashem so much. He only wants what Hashem wants. He only wants what will benefit Hashem's plan. He only wants what will enhance the Shekhinah, the dimension of godliness that currently is in a limited form. And so his entire drive to do what Hashem wants has not one strand of self-interest. It is completely dedicated to Hashem's purpose. And on that very, very high note, we conclude the story of the Tzadik Gomer and go to the opposite extreme in the next chapter when we start to talk about people who might sound a little bit more familiar to us.